On the democracy element, though, I mean, I would be more inclined to focus on what policies is there a sort of broad consensus among the public that don't get reflected in Westminster. And, I mean, Israel-Gaza war, I think, is one of them. You know, there is an overwhelming support among the public, I think 75% or so, for a ceasefire. But you won't hear any of the major parties call for one, which is partly because they follow whatever policy is developed in the White House.
There'll probably be a development on that tomorrow, if I'm to understand proceedings.
Yeah, so there'll be a vote, and it's the SNP who are putting forward the amendment, and both Labour and the Conservatives are expected to vote against it. Even though if you ask the general public, do you think it's OK for Israel to keep bombing hospitals, they're going to say no.
Well, Rishi Sunak was talking quite tough about that at the Lord Mayor's banquet, or whatever it was called.
Lord Mayor's banquet.
Last night, he was actually, I thought, quite critical of Israel. He was talking about, I can't remember his exact terminology, but it was something like aggressive settlements and stuff. And that's, you know, unless I've missed it, it's not talked that tough before.
Well, I think it's very much welcome that we are hearing a change of tone from Western politicians. I think in the immediate aftermath of the horrific attack on October the 7th, we basically just got all of these messages saying Israel can do exactly whatever they want. You know, they have free reign. International law, yeah, they'll probably follow it, who knows, but they can do what they want because they've had a national tragedy. Now, we are seeing a shift in tone. I do have a problem, though, here with politicians sort of saying, look at me, I'm against illegal settlements, because every politician has said it for the past 20 years. And if what you won't do is put your money where your mouth is and say, OK, we're not going to give Israel military aid unless they stop the settlements. We're going to introduce sanctions unless they stop the settlements. Then the Israeli government are just going to say, OK, we've noted your opinions there, but we're going to keep expanding the settlement. So I don't have that much faith that Rishi Sunak using this language means that he's actually serious about getting Israel to follow international law.
Do you?
I noted his comments last night, and I thought that they were potentially more significant.
Just 2 seconds, because actually I've got his comments. So before you reference that, just in case anyone's not familiar with what Alex has noted them, but if you haven't, here they are.
Home. But there are many things that Israel must do as part of its response. We've been clear that they must act within international law. They must take all measures to protect innocent civilians, including at hospitals, stop extremist violence in the West Bank and allow more aid into Gaza.
There you go. Alex has noticed his points, and now so have you, Alex.
Yeah, and I think that, broadly speaking, and believe me, people will disagree about this, I think Israel's doing those things. And I think that Israel is entitled to act as it has done and to defend itself. Indeed, Israel's the only country that seems to be expected by some in the world to act with some sort of benign restraint when thousands of its citizens get slaughtered in an unprovoked attack. There's nothing in international law that says you have to do that. And indeed, as long as your activity is proportionate to the aims that you've identified, in this example, stamping out a terrorist organisation, then it's perfectly compliant with international law. And I've listened and read a good deal around it from experts who think that too. Of course, you'll always find people who disagree, but I think Israel's meeting the test that the Prime Minister set out. The point I was going to make was about the emphasis that the Prime Minister's placed on it, which is news. Right? The fact that the Prime Minister has taken this position, which is different to that which the government has emphasised in the past, is news. And I think it's going to make it difficult for Starmer because, of course, frankly, in his voter base, there's much more appetite for a hostile position towards Israel than there is amongst the Conservative Party's voter base. But make no mistake, the reason that people aren't currently calling for a ceasefire, by the way, amongst two parties, neither of which want a ceasefire presently, the reason people aren't calling for a ceasefire within the Conservative Party or Labour is, one, Hamas wouldn't obey it if it were put in place, and two, Israel isn't at war with Gaza. Israel is trying to stamp out a terrorist organisation which is prescribed in this country.
Did anyone see Jeremy Corbyn last night? Did anyone see that? You would have seen that?
It wasn't a great interview.
It was an absolute shocker. If you weren't watching it and if you've not seen it, long story short, he was asked, do you regard Hamas as a terrorist organisation? He was asked repeatedly because he wouldn't answer the question, and then he responded by doing a fabulous impression of my 3-year-old son. It was kind of like that. He still didn't really answer the question. Why? What's wrong with people? By the way, we had this conversation as well a couple of weeks ago. It took me a while to get there with you. You eventually said, correct me if I'm wrong, that if people prescribe or describe Israel as terrorists, then you would do the same with Hamas. Mm-hmm. Why can't people literally just say, take away all the other ifs, buts and maybes, yes, Hamas are terrorists? Why is that so difficult for the likes of Jeremy Corbyn?
Because I do think that it serves a political purpose what we describe different actors in a conflict as. So for me, I think it's really important we come from this from the perspective of killing children is terrible, whoever does it.
Yeah.
And I think if we say that Israel is this incredibly normal nation state and they're always killing children by accident, whereas Hamas do it in this sort of brutal way, I think we are misunderstanding what's going on. And I suppose this comes back to what you were saying earlier, which is you think they're following international law.
I do.
And this is just an operation where they're trying to defeat this terrorist organisation. For one, they have destroyed or damaged half of the buildings in Gaza. Now, do they really think that terrorists are hiding in half of the buildings of Gaza? Or does it seem more like this is a war where they are trying to make Gaza unlivable because they want to clear it out in the long term? And this is a long-term project of the people who are in power in Israel, because I also worry that by calling Hamas terrorists in Israel this normal government, what we do is we mislead people about the nature of Netanyahu and his coalition partners. Because you're saying Israel is already working to try and inhibit the extremism of right-wing settlers in the West Bank. But those right-wing settlers in the West Bank are in government. One of them is finance minister. And the finance minister has been saying that he wants a second Nakba. Now, Nakba is what's described as the catastrophe for the Palestinians, which was them all getting kicked out of their homes in 1948. And there are so many Israeli politicians at the moment saying, what we want to do is clear out Gaza and never let them back.
Well, I think Israel's intention is to get out of Gaza and never have to go in again. And I think I bear in mind, too, that 20% of Israelis are Israeli Arabs, and that they're the only Arabs who get to enjoy a liberal democracy in which it's safe to be gay, in which it's safe to disagree with the regime, in which people might vote for one side and then government changes and opposition takes government. These are things that I rejoice. I also note that in the 17 years since the Palestinian Authority were booted out by Hamas, there hasn't been an election in Gaza.